Welcome to Real Men, Designed for Greatness, a program intended to assist men and ultimately families and communities to live out their call faithfully and courageously as they work to rebuild, restore, and revitalize the culture. I'm your host, John Sablon, and with me is my co-host, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, and we welcome you to episode number 8, Made for More. This episode will be part 1 of a 2-part theme in Made for More, and in this episode we'll be talking specifically about the theology of the body and authentic male masculinity, Catholic masculinity, as we've been trying to help restore that throughout this entire series. Now, Deacon, we're just coming off, another theme when we're talking about, this idea of mercy and both mission and mercy. These next 2 episodes we're going to be talking about being made for more. Right now that we've experienced and encountered forgiveness, we know our identity, our value, our purpose, our self-worth in God, and now to be instruments of that. Now, in order for us to do that, right, we have to kind of take ourselves back again to the basics of understanding ourselves as men. What does authentic masculinity look like? Primarily, we'll be talking about, through the eyes of Pope St. John Paul II's theology of the body and what it means to be man, in that sense. But before we go there, we started off the series kind of looking at the identity crisis. What we're seeing out there in the culture, what society is showing us or trying to impose on us relative to their confusion and bewilderment relative to how God designed us. So let's have a little discussion on, what are we seeing out there with regards to human sexuality, authentic masculinity? What are our challenges that we face as Catholic men?
Well, that's where to start.
It's
like we done lost our minds in this culture today, right? And so obviously you have the struggle, I think there's an external component and an internal component. So obviously the external component is the imposition of society's values onto the culture. So the acceptance of the so-called redefinition of marriage, where marriage can be between 2 people of the same sex, or even between people in objects or animals or whatever. I mean, so there's that. There's the going back a little bit, acceptance of contraception and abortion. I think has also played a strong role in that as well. I think this idea of gender fluidity. Which is the latest assault now on a culture of life. Our authentic identity is male and female. He created them. The fact that you have some people, even when the children are young, say they have a boy, they're dressing him and treating him as a boy one week, and then dressing him and treating him as a girl the next week, until the child gets old enough to determine whether they want to be a boy or a girl. I mean, so we're now imposing this. This is something that the culture is now imposing onto families, onto culture, and onto society. And then you have the internal struggles as well. Struggling with pornography, struggling with, drugs and alcohol, trying to fill the void and the emptiness that sometimes sin puts in our life. Instead of looking toward God, we're trying to find these other ways to make ourselves feel good, and so, of course, the acts that go along, looking at pornography, of course, contraception and those other things as well. So I think, there's a twofold assault on us as in our culture, particularly from men too, and human trafficking. So is another one too, and that's totally fueled by pornography. Each of these things leads to another one. They're all interwoven and connected in a way, and it's definitely a danger to the salvation, quite frankly, of many men in our society today.
Yeah, it's overwhelming to think about the number of issues we have that we face in our culture, especially as men. This idea where think about the beauty in the church's teaching of the dignity of the human person. Right, where that's completely lost in today's world and society. The dehumanization, right? So we're dehumanizing persons, people, and we're humanizing dogs and pets and things, right? And so we've got this whole twisted, distorted, perverted view of who we are as people and how that actually in relation to the world and to other. And so that's why we see things like, human trafficking. the exploitation of children, and women and at large. So it's sad and tragic, but also I'm baffled by the fact why people are so surprised when we have all those things present. We're objectifying women and children, people. We're dehumanizing, right? We no longer see the person in people. And then we act surprised when, these massacres occur, or we have these, and very tragic. So I don't want to take away from that, but you can't have both, right? If we start fundamentally at who we are created in God's image and likeness, that regardless of whether I like you, I respect you as a human person, right? That you, the author of life, has created you. You have dignity because of that very fact, and that's a reality. So, we're obviously, like you said, both that external and internal struggle and this imposition of that lie.
Yeah, and what we're doing is we're replacing God in society with all these other things that we think are gods. Again, it goes back to Genesis 3. You will be like God. So we create these gods out of these other things. And I want to. You mentioned something very important. Dehumanization. I think that happens at a couple of different levels. One, at a very basic, like, why we say, well, why is contraception wrong? What's the big deal about that? Well, it's a dehumanization process, because if we're made in the image and likeness of God, that means that we need to see each other the way God sees us. We need to look at each other through God's eyes, right? What we see is what God sees. But when you contracept, what you're doing is you're not looking at the person through the eyes of God. You're looking at the person as an object for pleasure and gratification. I remember a guy came to complain. After a homily I gave where I talked about the theology of the body, a guy came to me and he said, he wanted to talk to me after Mass. So he took me to the side and I said, yeah, what's going on? He goes, well, not here. I want to talk. He wanted to talk privately. So we go inside the rectory. And I said, what's going on? He goes, I didn't like your homily. I said, which part? All of it. I said, what's the problem? And he goes, well, you're talking about all this stuff, and you got to understand, most of the people sitting out there in the pew, don't agree with what the church says anyway. The church is stuck in the Middle Ages and the 10th century. The church has to get caught up with the times and all this kind of stuff. So I said, so you and your wife are contracepting? Well, of course we're contracepting. Everybody's contracepting. That's the thing. I said, so you didn't like the homily because I'm telling the truth. And so basically you're saying, I think what I'm saying is true, but you think what you're saying is true. I said, okay. So but what's the issue? What's going on? So he talked about his at home with his wife, and he said, him and his wife contraceptives, how's that going for you? And he said, well, my wife doesn't want to have sex anymore. I said, oh, that's not good. Well, what's going on? He goes, I said, what does that look like? He said, well, the kids were gone, the teenagers were gone, and we were home by ourselves. We had a nice dinner. And then a little while later, I made the advances. Yeah, I get you. I said, what happened? And he said, my wife said to me, I don't want to have sex with you right now. And I'm waiting for more. And he said, that was it. I said, well, wait a minute. That's all she said? Yes. I said, well, let me see if I understand. Did your wife tell you I don't love you anymore? No. Did your wife tell you I don't ever want to have sex with you ever again? No. You said that she said, I don't want to have sex with you right now. Did you say to her, okay, what about an hour from now? You even give her that much? No. So, and I said, then why are you angry? Disappointed, I can see, but why are you so angry? And he couldn't tell me. See, here's the thing. When God created us in his image and likeness, and notice the order in both Genesis 1 and 2, he establishes a covenant relationship first. Then his very first thing in Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In Genesis 2, man leaves father, mother, and cleanses his wife, and the two become one. But he establishes the covenant first, ripped from the side, establishes the covenant, and then the two become one flesh. So God's order is covenant first, the consummation of that covenant second. But what we've done is we've moved God from the picture. We just want to go right to the consummation piece. But what happens is when you separate love and life, because that's the key distinction. Life is an outpouring and overflowing of God's love. Psalm 119, verse 88, because of your love, O Lord, give me life, and I will do your will. You see the order there. So when we get things out of order, we become disordered. See, a lot of people don't like that word in the church because the church uses the word disordered, but it's not means like psychological disorder. It means going out of the order that God established. And when you go out of God's order, things get messed up in your life. You know? But you could choose that. God is not making you do that. You're choosing to do it. I said, by choosing to contracept, you separated love and life, intimacy and communion, and that separation has left an emptiness. And we try to fill it with this and fill it with this and fill it with drugs, alcohol, sex, work, all these things. It's like a bottomless pit, doesn't go anywhere. So I said, I bet what you did was you probably went to your computer, you started looking at porn, and you took care of things yourself, didn't you? He just looked at me, he goes, yeah, I did. I said, yeah, the reason why you did that, because you're a slave of Satan. I said, basically, your wife, you no longer see her as your battle partner, as your significant. You see her as an object that gives you pleasure and gratification. And when she couldn't do that, you like a little boy, you got mad. You had to go and do other things to find pleasure because pleasure's your God. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's not your God anymore. Pleasure is your God. So it doesn't matter whether it's your hand, whether it's a computer, whether it's your phone, it doesn't matter. Because all you want is the pleasure. You don't want the commitment that goes with that. That's the problem. And he just looked at me like, I can't believe you just said that to me, you know? But it's the truth. I mean, you gotta speak the truth in love, but it's the truth. And men need to be spoken to as men. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it or water it down for him. That is the truth. And so he said to me, well, what do you do? I said, I'll tell you for real. I go on international speaking tours, right? Maybe for 2 weeks or so. I come back and a very real situation. I got back from a trip, I think it was to Asia, and I was unpacking my dirty clothes in the hamper, you know, and I haven't been with my wife for a long time, so I'm like, tonight, you know, it's gonna be gross, it's gonna be awesome. And then as I'm in the bathroom, I look in the garbage can, I'm like, oh, come on, man, you got to be kidding me. That's going on now? Like, oh, I gotta wait another week, you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. So what do you do in that situation, right? So now I've kind of built myself up in a certain way with this expectation of this intimacy, which is now not going to happen, right? So what do you do in that situation? Like a lot of men, because they have that separation of love and life, it's not integrated, you know, they'll go and get that satisfaction from something else. What I do is I take the Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas, you know, because I got 3,000 books on theology and philosophy in my study, but the one I keep closest to me is the Summa. And when that happens, and that does happen, you know, I go into my study, I start reading St. Thomas Aquinas, that feeling goes away. Because reading St. Thomas Aquinas will kill any sexual desire you have in your body, right? But it's funny, but I told him I'd rather do that than to turn my wife into an object, into a thing, into a non-person. Because every day of my life as her husband and as the father of her children, I want to see her the way God sees her. I want to look at her through God's eyes. And I want any man that's going to be with my daughters to look at them the same way. So I have to be that example to my girls and to my son. If I want my son to be a man of God, he needs to look at me, not some athlete or some movie star or somebody in the culture. I want him to come to me. I want him to look at me and see the kind of man that God needs him to be. And so I need to live that example in every aspect of my life, including the integration of body and spirit.
I mean, that's a big part of what this episode's talking about, and I think it's it's a sad time to see where we reduce the human person to a mere sexual orientation. That somehow defines it, you know, and the church in herself, you know, we stand for so much truth. It's wonderful being Catholic, you know, but you know, for a lot of the culture and the media in particular likes to say that, you know, the church is so always trying to get in the bedroom, always about your sexual life, and it's like, actually, we're about, you know, truth, goodness, and beauty. Y'all keep bringing up contraception. You all keep bringing up abortion or same-sex attraction. And, you know, we see this in the culture that they lived out where we'll see feminism, right? They want to be treated as people, but in their parades and rallies and protests, they're dressed as body parts. And so we're trying to lift you higher and say, no, that you are body and soul composite, right? That you're more than just your body. You are a person underneath that. And for us men, we taking it back to this example, what you're saying is, we're the culture tries to sell us on that we're these buffoons and that we're governed by our passions, and it's about the flesh and our feelings rather than virtue and holiness, about serving, protecting, defending our wives and our children, and upholding, and Pope St. John Paul II says, right, it's the obligation of every man to uphold the dignity of every woman, right? So it's in our responsibility. We're designed for that, and yet we sit back and we become a slave to Satan.
And that's why the culture looks at celibacy, like a celibate priesthood, as that's odd, that's strange, that's weird. Who would want to do that? Why are you suppressing your sexual, as if it was something bad?
Right.
But what they're doing is they're freeing themselves to be able to make a gift of themselves. See, that's the key. That's the key, is the making a gift of yourself. That's what God's love and life integrated in us. It's a gift. God gave us the gift of life, and we have to be a gift of our lives to others. And because we're body and soul, because we're integrated beings, you don't separate one from the other. So the body expresses the person, not your feelings. It expresses the person that you are, made in the image of God. So one example you'll say for same-sex attraction is, well, God made me this way. And they'll try to say, well, just God makes people in different ways. And someone said that to me once, and I said, well, why did Jesus do any miracles then? They said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, for example, the man born blind. He was blind from birth, and he came to Jesus for healing. If he was born that way, why didn't Jesus say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do for you. God the Father made you that way. You were born that way, and that's just who you are. I'm sorry. Next. But that's not what he did. He healed the person. Why? Because we're not supposed to be born blind. We're not supposed to be born deaf. We're not supposed to be born with one hand. We're not supposed to be born with Down syndrome or trisomy 13 or anencephaly. Those are sad and tragic results of the effects of original sin. And so we're called to love and mercy and intimacy and communion. So you're not supposed to be born homosexual. There's no proof. Let's say they found a gene that causes homosexuality. What would that prove? That there's something there that's not supposed to be there. But that doesn't, see, we have to remember, it's not the person that's the problem. Someone that's born with Down syndrome, but we see that condition, that's the problem. We see the condition, we don't see the person. That's part of the dehumanization. We don't want to see the human being, we want to see a condition. So what, in the same-sex attraction, they've embraced that disordered, again, out of God's order, they've embraced that passion instead of integrating it and recognizing that God calls us to a standard. And because for a lot of reasons for same-sex attractiveness is psychological, not physical. But even if it was physical, again, it would show that just like in trisomy 13 or in Down syndrome, there's an extra chromosome there that's not supposed to be there. But we don't blame the person. You don't take it out on the person. You don't, but we're in a culture where that's the case now, where your identity is wrapped up in your feelings or in your experience, without going back and looking at the nature, which also, and a natural law, which informs that experience.
Yeah, what's interesting though, when you go back to talking about the disordered passion, right, is that a lot of people, they talk about being who you are, who you really are, really only when it comes to sexual orientation and gender identity, right? Because we all battle with different disordered passions.
Sure.
Right, so if there's anger, those are one of those things I know I dealt with for a long time. If you're impatient, if you're like me and you like food and like a lot of sweets, right? You have a disordered passion to some degree. But encouraging us to live that out. Hey, that's who you are. You're just an angry person, John. Live that out to the fullest. No. We're not saying that. Because then that would obviously cause harm, and it's not good for me to be that person.
And what's the culture? As long as I don't hurt anyone.
Right.
That's the default.
Right, that's the default, and it's a lie. Because recognizing that we're in a community, right? That we are, we are one world, one cosmos, and that everything you do or don't do is going to impact someone around you. It's never just an isolated incident. Whether you agree with that or admit that or not, it's a reality. But, going back to this idea of, because we're obviously on this topic of theology of the body and this integration of human sexuality, right, into our very person. Pope St. John Paul II talks about this, this idea of, original solitude, and this idea of, think about alone and helper. He talks about that in theology of the body of, these two words, and to understand that the time when things were not good, it is not good for man to be alone, right? Whereas in creation, everything was good, right? Man was very good. But this idea where, what does that tell us about us as men, right? Yeah. That to be alone is not good, therefore God knew this, provided us a helper in woman, and that we were made for community, like you're saying, made for relationship, and that we don't know the fullness of our very essence unless it's in communion with other, specifically, right, with women, man and woman. Again, not taken away from the consecrated single or those who battle with same-sex attraction, but recognizing that in the fullness of our very essence of how we were made, we see that in Scripture that Adam, it's not good for him to be alone, therefore I need something to complement him in order for him to be fully alive, right, to fully experience what God has intended for him.
Exactly. And, you brought up so much there. Let me come at it like this before I talk about original solitude, because you said something about essences and being. That's really critical. Why do you think that atheism is so popular right now? I know we're talking about theology of the body, but this is important with regard to that. Because what atheism does, it denies two basic realities. I'll get a little bit philosophical here, but we can't be afraid to kind of bring it a little bit in the Catholic Church, because we're thinkers, right? We're not just fillers, we think. And so a classical way of understanding our nature and our being, we would look at it, there's two things, teleology and essence, okay? So in other words, let me break that down. So a teleological approach would say that our lives and the universe has a purpose and a meaning. There's a rationality behind those kinds of things. And therefore, we have essences. So there's, for example, if I said the word dog, right? Every person watching us or listening to us, in their mind, formed an idea of what dog is. Okay, so it could have been a Doberman Pinscher, could have been German Shepherd, could have been a poodle, could have been whatever, it doesn't matter. But so there's essences. So reality can be known through the use of abstract and universal concepts. We can come to understand reality that way. But what atheism does, it denies, first of all, that there's any meaning to anything. So if life is meaningless, then what's the point? I can impose my will on someone else because I don't recognize that their life has any purpose or meaning. That's the first piece. And then without the essences, so there is no such thing as dogness. A dog, you can only know things through the empirical study of specific objects. So in other words, the only way, if I said dog, the reality would be if a dog walked in the room. The idea of, like, when I said dog, you form the idea in your mind, that's not real. Why? Because all we are just, the difference between me and this table is that I am just a rearrangement of meaningless molecules. Right? I mean, so that's what's happening. And so that then makes its way into integrating who you are as a person. So what John Paul II, recognizing that, to me, he was a prophet. He could see what was coming down the road. So I think this whole theology of body was a preparation for the kinds of things we're experiencing right now. And so in the original solitude, man recognizes a couple things, right? He recognizes that he's superior to all the other creatures that God is, a prophet. He recognizes that he can know himself, he's self-conscious, he's self-aware of his existence and being, and he can know God. So in that original solitude, he knows those things. He lives from those things because those are things that are given to him by God. Well, why is it not good for man to be alone? Because if we're made in image and likeness of God, God exists as a family.
Right.
as a communion of persons. Right. So man by himself makes no sense because he cannot be in communion with anyone else. Hence the Ezer Kenegdo, the helper,
That's right.
the battle partner, the woman who has her own, who's also created in the same original solitude as him. Mm-hmm. But yet she's feminine and he's masculine. They have this beautiful complementarity. Mm-hmm. And it's because of those differences that complement each other that they're able to have unity. Mm-hmm. You see?
Yeah.
That's beautiful because God exists, Father and Son, and love between the Father and Son generates the Holy Spirit. They give love, life, intimacy, community to each other, and it gets poured back into each one of them. Mm-hmm. You know? And so in a family on earth, father, husband, they generate children, the children get the love back and the love in between every. So it's like the family on earth is the image and likeness of the family in heaven.
Yeah. You know, that's.
And our bodies express that reality in the conjugal act.
So wow.
Or in celibacy in the priesthood.
So,
which anticipates heaven.
Yeah. So think about, we jam-packed in this episode. And unfortunately, we've run out of time on this one to kind of delve deeper into this. So we're going to take this over to part 2 of this series to further kind of explore being made for more and what that looks like. So in our next episode, Deacon, we're talking a little bit more about this, but kind of focusing on from that, understanding who we are as men and who we are in that very essence to the universal call to holiness, to sainthood. So I just want to thank all the viewers out there for joining us on this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, and God bless.
If you have good news, we expect you to want to share it. Salvation in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who for love of us and for our salvation came down from heaven. Salvation in his name, and he is the only Savior, is what we are on earth for. Therefore, all those who spread the good news of salvation in Jesus Christ, we should encourage them. I can speak, but how many people can I reach alone? But the media, the television people, the radio, the newspapers, and all those who use the computer and its derivatives in various ways to spread the gospel, we must thank them, we must encourage them, we must work with them so that they can continue to spread the good news. There's so much news that is not so wonderful in the world, but there is also news that is wonderful on the gospel of Jesus Christ. We encourage them and beg God to bless them, especially the Shalom World TV. God bless you.
Shalom World, God's own channel.